Hello everyone, welcome to PiSquare Academy. This is Snehalika and today PiSquare is here with a video on capacitors, supercapacitors and batteries. So if you are new to our channel, please like and subscribe us and hit the bell icon if you want more such videos. So today we will be starting on capacitors, supercapacitors and batteries. So generally there is a very common misunderstanding or understanding on certain things like what is a capacitor, how does a supercapacitor change or has advantages over a capacitor, and then how come battery finally comes into picture, and then we have now distinction of a capacitor, a supercapacitor and a battery. So to start with, I have listed down 6 major points on which we will be describing the entire analysis, or basically we will be understanding the major differences and similarities based on 6 different points. The first one being the composition. The composition of these components are very crucial, because only then you will be able to understand how they distinguish from each other. So now let's start with the composition. So all of the three, the capacitor, the supercapacitor and the battery, have metal plates. The distinguishing factor is where and how are these metal plates kept. So for a capacitor, these two metal plates are separated with a dielectric. I hope you have already come across the word dielectric. It is nothing but an insulator which has a tendency to be polarized in the presence of electric field. So all the insulators do not have this tendency, and hence you can distinguish between what's an insulator and what's an dielectric. So coming back to capacitor, the capacitor has a dielectric between the two metal plates. For a supercapacitor, the supercapacitor has a porous carbon material generally. Why do I say porous? Because that porous will increase the surface area of the plate, and hence you can have more storage of charges, and hence the only reason why supercapacitors have higher capacitance. Because what is actually capacitance? Capacitance is the capacity to store charges at a certain voltage. So obviously the supercapacitor will have a higher tendency to store charges. Now how does this higher tendency come? See, again we have two metal plates in a supercapacitor, and there is a third insulator kept in between this. Okay, so this insulator creates double layer charge. I'll repeat, this insulator, let me put it more clearly. This insulator is creating a double layer charge in the supercapacitor, and hence you can see that there can be stored charges on both sides. I'll show you that with the help of animation. So on seeing, you saw that double layer charge, right? So that gives the supercapacitor the tendency to store so much charges. Even the material that I was speaking that lies in between, that is also porous, giving it more surface area. Obviously if there is more surface area, there can be more accumulation of charges. And this is the only reason, the composition of a supercapacitor which gives it the value of higher capacitance. That brings us to the second important point of range, that these capacitors are in the range of microfarads, but the supercapacitors are ranged in the farads. Like you will even easily get a 10 farad capacitor, supercapacitor actually. So that was about composition. Now let's come down to battery. Now what happens in a battery? Again we have an electrolyte in a battery and we have chemicals. If it's a lead acid battery, there are composition, the electrode, the anode, cathode, the electrolyte. There is a certain composition of them based on which type of battery you are using, like a lithium ion battery, like a lead acid battery. All these composition come from which type of anode, cathode and electrolyte you are using. Okay. So based on that, that's why I have written chemicals. It can be any chemical based on which type of battery we are using. So that was on the composition of, so I'll show you certain batteries. So yeah, So I think you have seen the composition, how a battery looks, be it a lead acid battery, be it a lithium ion battery. So that next brings us to our next important point of voltage rating. Now you will notice that the capacitors have a dielectric, right? So you can work with a capacitor at very high voltage ranges. There will be no insulation breakdown, nothing will happen. What will happen that if you have a higher voltage, more charges will be accumulated on the metal plates of the capacitor. But the supercapacitor has a very small voltage range. Now why is that? That only occurs because if you give a very high voltage range to a supercapacitor, or maybe if you want it to operate at a very high voltage, the electrolyte starts to decompose. Once the electrolyte starts to decompose, your supercapacitor will not work anymore, or maybe malfunction or whatever. You will basically destroy the capacitor or the electrolyte. Rather, you will destroy the electrolyte and hence the supercapacitor. So supercapacitors can never be operated at very high voltages. Last, batteries. Batteries do come in lots of ranges. Generally we have seen a 3.6 volt battery. You have seen your batteries in your cell phones, 5 volt battery, lithium ion batteries. We can also go to the most common ones are the 12 volts batteries, car battery, higher voltages. So there are. So I have just written that tens of volts. You generally have a range of certain voltages of batteries. So but we do offer a certain limit to the battery voltage also, just to be on the safety side. We do have to be very cautious while using a battery. So based on certain parameters of safety, we have the voltage ranges. So we do not go very higher, like kilovolts is not possible for a battery, but it is possible for a capacitor. So the next important parameters that we will be discussing is energy density and power density. Now what do we mean by energy density and power density? Basically it is energy per weight, energy per volume, or power per weight, power per volume. That is energy density and power density. So capacitors are known to have a remarkable power density, but batteries are known to have a remarkable energy density. See, the distinguishing parameter between energy density and power density is only time. Power into time is energy. So when I speak of energy density and power density, it means if you want power for a certain period of time, you go for high energy density. If you want power in burst, you go for high power density. Because power density can be high, it will be going and coming. But for energy density, it has to be a prolonged supply of power. That is what is the remarkable concept of energy density and power density. And hence I have described how it is low and high for a battery. Power density is high for both capacitor and supercapacitor, and it is low for a battery. Now coming to charging and discharging. So quickly, just now I told you that the power density is high for capacitors, so they can quickly charge or discharge in a fraction of seconds. Fraction of seconds they take to charge and fraction of seconds they take to discharge. Because they are storing their energy on the plates, the potential energy that we are speaking of is being stored on the plates of the capacitor. So capacitors are taking seconds to charge and discharge because the potential energy they are storing is on the plates of the capacitor. So the charge and discharge is very quick. But when you come to a battery, the battery takes hours to charge as well as hours to discharge. Now you will notice that for any cell phone battery also, there is a certain period of charging and there is a prolonged period of discharging. That is why you charge your phones maybe in an hour or two, but your phone discharges for a very long period of time, or it takes very long time to discharge. Now what is the remarkable difference here is that when you are charging your phone, the electrical energy is being converted into chemical energy, and when you are discharging, the same chemical energy is being converted into electrical energy. So once this chemical energy is converting into electrical energy, that is during discharge, there is some latency, or there is some, what is the actual word, there is this way that this chemical energy is being converted into electrical energy, and it takes time to do that. That is why always our discharging period is higher compared to our charging period. So that was quick and short all about capacitors, supercapacitors and battery. The composition is as such that the double layers in the supercapacitors allow the capacitor to store more charges, hence the name supercapacitor, but they cannot be used for high voltage ranges because the same high voltage range can disturb or distort the electrolyte, and hence you cannot go for high voltage ranges in a supercapacitor, but obviously you can go for a capacitor because there we have a dielectric. Coming to batteries, batteries do not go for very high voltages up to kilovolt based on the safety factor. The energy density always high for a battery, power density always high for a capacitor, charging and discharging times are in seconds for a capacitor and in hours for a battery. So I hope you understood the major differences between the three. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe and stay tuned for our next upcoming videos. Thanks for watching. Keep learning, keep rocking.